Hey, what's up, everybody? June 30th is National eSign Day here in the US, and it officially marks 22 years since former President Bill Clinton signed into law the Electronic Signatures in Global and National Commerce Act. So to commemorate this, I'm wearing a stupid-ass panda suit, so if you're only listening to this, you're missing out on the visual experience. Because pandas love documents and e-signatures, or at least I do because I'm from PandaDoc. Anyway, we decided to do an episode, a special episode, where we're going to debunk some myths on e-signatures and answer some questions about what it's like to sell into the legal field, legal profession, and we'll also discuss just what technology in this industry means, right? Bill Clinton certainly had his own idea for what this would look like in the future, and today with me to do that is Reed Anderson, account executive at PandaDoc. Reed, welcome to the show. You're back again, dude. Second
back
time.
at it. Thanks for having me.
Right on, man. You actually
super excited.
You're the first person I've ever had on twice.
No way.
Congrats.
Okay. I'm flattered.
Big deal. I've got an opening clip I want you to take a look at as we're talking about the perception of lawyers and new technology and software. So let's take a look here and watch it together.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take
we're
a
trying to. Can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to.
Oh, he's got his assistant there. She's trying.
I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I can see that.
I can't.
I think if you click the up arrow next to this.
That's a real, actual, I believe, hearing that was taking place at a district court in Texas when a lot of stuff for lawyers was happening over Zoom. So, yeah, let's talk about selling new technology to lawyers and legal teams. I'm going to pull back my Panda covering here. So, when I was getting ready for this episode, I was talking with a couple different people on your team, and there was a little bit of a devil's advocate about trying to sell PandaDoc specifically, but I have a feeling there are other horizontal business SaaS tools or folks who are trying to sell to lawyers, and they struggle. And so here is a quote. I won't say who it's from to protect their identity because it's a little harsh, but I'm eager to hear your response to it. So it reads, "I won't bother going after legal teams anymore because their profession is founded upon getting paid for billable hours, which means that the longer something takes, the more money they make. So they're not interested in a software like PandaDoc or other softwares that speed up their job processes. They want to move as slowly as possible." What do you think about it?
Whew.
Loaded.
Wow. Yeah. We're like a minute in and I'm already worried about a defamation lawsuit.
Dude, say goodbye to your dreams of going to law school.
Man. Sorry, Mom. You know what? There's some truth to it. I probably would have totally dismissed it before I was in sales, selling, just, okay, everybody needs systems that improve things, but I have had some experiences where things were really being dragged along, and a colleague of mine just put this on my radar for, hey, this might be happening. At the end of the day, I think it's just incentives.
Yeah.
Like humans respond to incentives. So if you are incentivized to take a little bit longer, not saying you're going to draw things out for a year or months or even weeks, but maybe push it out a couple days or another back and forth.
Yeah.
So,
I think as well, it's good to note here that there are lots of different types of lawyers and legal teams that are using all sorts of different tools, and not all of them are using billable hours. There's a subset of attorneys that work in that kind of function and do it that way. There are others who only make money if they win the case. So yeah, you could bet that they probably do want to save time. So
Yeah.
I can understand the frustration. I think there is some truth to that when you run into it, but I think you said it well, man.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about your experience selling into legal teams and lawyers who, whether they want to or don't want to invest in new technology, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that companies make when they're trying to attract and maybe pitch lawyers?
Probably the biggest one is just assuming that they have the same pain points and are looking for the same value adds that your other personas are.
Mm-hmm.
So for where I'm at, we sell a lot to sales and marketing. And, if I was selling car, like marketing, right, they want a car that looks really nice. Sales wants one that goes really fast. Legal, sometimes they don't want those same things, right? They're going to want, in my experience, something with a lot of control, 4-wheel drive, and probably airbags like all around it, because salespeople are running wild and they need to keep them controlled and safe and right, not expose themselves legally. So I think just assuming you're going to be able to roll with the same marketing and attract the same or attract people for the same reasons.
Yeah.
It's an obvious one, but you need to talk to lawyers at the end of the day to get their feedback before you roll anything out like that, because they will surprise you with their answers, I think.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Not assuming the same pitch, the same messaging, or pain points are going to work in these two very different, like if it's sales and marketing and legal, you better be ready, man.
You better be ready.
Have you ever successfully sold to a lawyer or legal team, and what led them to buying with you?
Yeah, I do have a handful of successes under my backwards cap. So the most important thing for me was I made mistakes in the beginning and then learned from those. The mistakes were almost always around trying to force something on a system that they really, really liked. And so something that they just were not going to let go of, despite, in my view as a salesperson, it's going to save you time. It's going to do all these other things. And you might as well just call it out now. It's redlining Microsoft Word. In my experience, you're going to have to basically pull Word from their cold dead hands. They're going to use it.
Lawyer hands, yep.
Exactly. So for me, what I learned was just don't ignore. Let them have Microsoft Word for the redlining, and then try to uncover whether there were any value adds at the beginning of the process, before the redlining, and then after the redlining. And if there are, then just focusing on those, not trying to, cure cancer, fix everything, but just focusing on those areas. And so the wins that I have had, that's where we're most successful. And I mean, I even call out, if depending on what they're looking for, I'll call out, we're not going to touch Word. I'll be very clear about that because some people will react negatively and then it can kill your whole deal.
Yeah. Like, this guy doesn't know anything about my field. He's not going to be able to help me. First, I think that's great advice when you're trying, whether you're listening to this, you're not trying to sell PandaDoc, but you're trying to sell to a lawyer. Don't try to solve every single problem with the tool.
Yeah.
The legal field has been around for a very, very long time, and they have a tradition and a set of standards for how they do things. So when you're trying to successfully sell to them, don't try to disrupt everything. Just try to help find those little gaps that there are. And I love that, man. That's a really good approach too, because it's not overzealous. I'm thinking of every lawyer I know, and they're like, this guy's full of shit. He's trying to solve everything for me. He doesn't know anything.
And when you call it out too, when you acknowledge, hey, this is how we're going to handle the redlining process, but fundamentally it's still going to be in Word, and you call that out and maybe splice a little joke in there, they totally get it. And they're just like, all right, he knows what we're about. He's not trying to take this away from us. So let's focus on these other areas.
So it sounds like it's really helpful to get your reps in, like in practicing and figuring out, whatever it is you're trying to sell to a legal team or lawyers. You're going to have to find out the hard way of what they're not going to let go of and what the long, rich tradition of, their profession is going to be cool with and not. Yeah. So one of the things that is like a, common trope is that legal teams slow things down and they take forever, right? So if you're a seller and you're like, I've got quota to hit, it's the end of the month, end of the quarter, how the heck can I just work with legal teams better to get this freaking thing signed already? Like this deal, everybody's on board, but legal's holding this up. What tips do you have for this issue? Yeah,
two big ones, especially like Travis mentioned, if you're on a monthly or quarterly quota and something's time sensitive. One, you're going to have to do it earlier in the process. So if it could be too late to try to fix it this way, but just try to get the redlining or the legal review, all those documents that need to go back and forth between councils, try to start that earlier in the process. So what I used to do, and I know what a lot of reps do, is they'll very point by point, they'll do discovery, they'll do demo, confirm product fit, security, and then after all that's done, exchange the MSA and do the redlining. What I try to do now is parallel path that with those other points. So you're not going to be able to engage a legal team if you're in discovery because they haven't even acknowledged that you're the vendor and they don't want to waste time. But at a certain point, you will be able to do that alongside those other items that you have to check off. And hopefully they align at the end and you're not, stuck on the last day of the month.
Waiting for that MSA.
Yeah.
So are you sending, what does your process usually look like? After you've done discovery, are you sending the MSA along with the proposal? Are you bundling that stuff and you're like, here's what it's going to cost? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. So I'll include it with the proposal, with the pricing that I send over. But even before that, during discovery, try to get an idea of when their legal team can be engaged, confirm that they are going to want to redline it and have a review. And then, send it over as early as possible. Try to multi-thread. So if they don't know on their legal team who's involved, just ask questions around that. And just, try to get that started as early as possible, basically.
So questions like, all right, if you were to say yes to PandaDoc or whatever you're selling, who needs to be involved? Is there anyone else maybe missing from this conversation who's going to want to sign off on the final dotted line or might need to be involved? Is that kind of like how you're approaching it?
Yeah, I'm more assumptive even. And rightfully so, because it's very, very rare that they're not going to want to review. So I just assume, I'm like, your legal team is going to want to look at our MSA. Do they typically do that after you guys have like finalized a list of 2 or 3 vendors? Or would they be open to just starting that right now so that we can be more productive up front and not delay the project timeline?
I also see that you're framing this in like the RFP, request for proposal, kind of like, you're speaking, it sounds like, from like some enterprise experience where it's like a very official process of like trying to find a vendor. And so is there anything else that you think might speed up the process? I think you said there were 2 things.
There were 2. Yeah. This other one would be when you're going through the redlines or just any kind of back and forth that's usually facilitated via email. So you're the messenger, the in-between in this. They have their counsel, you have yours, and their counsel will put redlines on it. Your champ will email it to you, then you pass it off to, and it's just, there's a lot of stops on the way to getting it fully reviewed. So especially if they have a lot of redlines that are just hard to hash out via email or in Microsoft Word, I'll schedule a Zoom call, get both legal teams on that call, and they can just talk it out. And I mean, it really, really speeds things up because there can be tiny little interpretations or word differences that are just take a lot longer to do via email. And, one email back and forth can delay things by a couple days because you don't know how busy they are with other documents. Yeah. So it's sounds really simple, but just get everyone on a Zoom or a Teams or some kind of video conference call and talk it out. And I think in my experience too, we have a great legal team over here, but I think they're more open to coming to an agreement when they're actually talking to each other because they're not this amorphous person who they just know through Microsoft Word. It's a face that they can see, a person. Lawyers are people.
Shout out lawyers.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're just more open to, all right, let's deal with this. We don't want to have to schedule another call, do we? So let's work it out.
Yeah. I love it. What is one lesson you have painfully learned from selling to lawyers?
They're always going to want a red line. especially if you're working upmarket enterprise deals. You can get so far down. You've got product fit, done discovery, security, and you've even negotiated, and then maybe you forgot to loop in legal, and you think, all right, maybe this one's their team's not going to want to look at our or they're going to think our master service agreement is perfect.
Pass.
Yeah, maybe that's going to happen. And so you just kind of blind eye, ignorance is bliss, and you don't do it. And then inevitably they want to redline it, and it can push things out weeks. So yeah, it can be devastating. And I mean, another one, lawyers go on vacation. I had no idea that they did, but they didn't kill, it delayed. I've had a couple deals delayed. It came down to the wire, and boom, yeah, lawyers out for 2 weeks because they're in Aruba or Hawaii.
Lawyers really love going to the Caribbean, man.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Well, Reed, that was awesome. That really is helpful, and I feel like I'm ready to go up market and try to start selling now. I've got my, parallel paths. I've got my when to loop in folks, and understanding that MSAs are always going to be redlined, so just know that that's going to happen.
You'll probably have to lose the suit if you're on a Zoom call, but
I was
other
trying to
than
be
that,
like my man's on the Zoom earlier who was dressed up as a cat. Yeah, for those that were just listening, I don't know if I explained that, but it was a Zoom debacle where a guy accidentally had the cat filter turned on, didn't know how to turn it off. All right, let's switch gears. Let's go into the second section of this podcast. It is National eSign Day. I'm wearing the stupid suit. Let's debunk some eSign myths, because believe it or not, we actually did a little bit of like a radio road show, and we had some of our executives go and chat with just kind of like more like not folks who maybe aren't as familiar with like electronic signatures and SaaS and documentations. And there's still a lot of hesitation from folks who don't understand how this technology works, even though it came out 22 years ago. So let's start with the first myth, and we can kind of clarify them together.
Sure.
First one is electronic signatures and digital signatures are pretty much considered the same thing in the US.
False. Yeah, and maybe not for the people who are less technically savvy, and even including myself, like, because this kind of gets in the weeds, but there is a difference between digital and electronic. I think people generally use the terms synonymously, but there are some specific differences, mainly having to do with the level of security.
Okay.
And I think verification that's required. A digital is a step above electronic.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful. I did not know that. All right. Number 2, all electronic signatures have the same legal legitimacy, and it doesn't really matter which tool you use in the US.
False.
All right. I'm just
Another
setting
one.
this guy up for like
Setting
slam
me up.
dunks here, man.
Yeah. Well, I guess true doesn't require an explanation, right?
That's
I'm catching on. So false. Yeah. There are just a lot of different laws and compliances that different industries have that, depending on the industry and or who you're selling to, where the data is stored, all of those things factor into whether a document that you send specifically would be binding. So yeah, whether healthcare is a good example.
okay.
You need HIPAA compliance because you're going to have patient information potentially on documents. So not all e-signs are HIPAA compliant. PandaDoc wasn't HIPAA compliant before COVID hit, before the pandemic. It took us about a month after because there was so much demand, and we achieved that and threw a big party because it was a big deal. But yeah, HIPAA, there's FERPA, that's more in the EDU space.
For children. Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
education, and SOC 2 Type 2.
Okay.
That's a big one. So I kind of judge the importance of things based on how big a party we threw after we achieved them. And SOC 2 Type 2, it was a very fun time. I was in San Francisco back then. Yeah, it was huge. Yeah, it was enormous. And I had no idea what it was back then, but yeah, it warranted a big celebration. So yeah, you have to do your research at the end of the day. E-signature, it's somewhat commoditized these days, and there's just a lot of e-signs out there. I'll get on calls today and people will say, I ask them who else they're evaluating, and they'll name drop companies that I've never heard of. And I've been in this space for 5.5 years.
Yeah.
So you really got to do your research on there, on your industry, and on the actual software provider.
Perfect. Well said, man. Okay, moving on to the next one. Electronic signatures and contracts do not carry the same weight of the law as a pen and paper signature in the U.S.
That is false. Yeah, they do. So again, this is going to differ by industry. So there might be some very niche industries or situations where they wouldn't be. Certainly in the U.S., I believe it's almost every situation. But I think there are other countries that maybe are, if we want to say, lagging behind or just not as technologically adept, where they wouldn't be. So if you're just doing business in the U.S., you probably don't have anything to worry about. But I've calls with countries all over the world, and they have different laws in their jurisdiction. So again, it's just something you always got to let people know. You got to research this. Don't assume, because we know what happens when you do that.
Well, I'll also put out a shout out to the marketing team. We have a great list of different countries and different legalities, and state by state here in the U.S. So you can check out our website. Just type in on Google, PandaDoc, legal, eSignatures, state, country, something like that. It'll pop up, I promise.
Yep.
All right. So that actually brings us into the next one, which is good. Highly regulated industries like legal, finance, healthcare, and education cannot use electronic signatures because they require a paper trail in the U.S.
False. Again.
All of these are false. I'm just going to go ahead and say it, but I want you to help explain it. You do a better job of it.
Exactly. And I feel like I even answered this one partially. So
you did.
Yeah. But so they require different compliance or certifications, compliance levels, mainly having to do with the data.
Okay.
So for education, it's student data. There's an extra layer of certification or things you have to do around that. Healthcare, it's patient data. And depending on the business, some EDU companies, they need the data centers where the data is stored to be in a specific location. It's not okay if everything's just in the US. So yeah, again, depending on the industry and honestly, it's not just the industry, but it's sometimes the level of risk that a specific organization, security team, their security team would be willing to take on. So it's not all black and white. There's shades of gray there. People can interpret laws differently or risks differently.
Interesting. The only other one I could think of here to add on to what you said is with the industry of legal. Shout out PandaDoc Notary if you haven't checked that out. But I know that in a lot of legal scenarios, you do need a notarization, right, in order to make something binding in certain situations. Maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's, a will and testament or something like that. There are the vast majority of states in the U.S. Throughout COVID did pass laws to allow for remote online notarization. So you don't have to go in your car and drive to an appointment and sit down in front of some dummy who's going to just notarize something. So
Ron.
There you go.
RON. Yeah.
RON, remote online notarization. So quick plug there. And then let's look at the last one. Businesses cannot trust electronic signatures and contracts because they're easily hacked and forged. Before you answer this as false, because we know it's false, you would be surprised at the number of people who are still concerned about this exact issue. Like, there are thousands, if not millions of people who still think like, well, I don't want to do that because like, I'm worried about getting hacked. I'd rather sign a pen and paper. They can't come steal that from me. So what do you have to say to that than debunking this myth?
Yeah, it's, there maybe some people do. I'm not going to totally dismiss people being worried because, hey, if it's cloud-based, servers could go down or things could happen. But what I always like to point out is it's not like the alternative is completely risk-free either. People forge signatures, in the name of someone else, or so you're exposing yourself to risk.
You can lose a document
either way. Oh, exactly.
Really easily.
Right. You're killing trees. You're storing them in physical folders. It's so, at the end of the day, it's you can do it the old-fashioned way, but your business might fall behind.
Well said. All right. To wrap things up, let's play this brief clip from that day, 22 years ago, starting where Bill Clinton addresses for the Electronic Signature and Global and National Commerce Act signing. I'll put on my hat for this one.
Online contracts will now have the same legal force as equivalent paper contracts. Companies will have the legal certainty they need to invest and expand in electronic commerce. They'll be able not only to purchase products and services, but to contract to do so. And they could potentially save billions of dollars by sending and retaining monthly statements and other records in electronic form. Eventually, vast warehouses of paper will be replaced by servers about the size of VCRs. Customers will soon enjoy a whole new universe of online services. With the swipe of a smart card and the click of a mouse, they'll be able to finalize mortgages, sign insurance contracts, or open brokerage accounts. Just as importantly, the law affords consumers who contract online the very same kind of protections and records, such as financial disclosures, they currently receive when they sign paper contracts.
All right, that's pretty good right there.
Consumers will be able to choose.
As I fall asleep listening to Bill Clinton. Yeah, I think it's kind of eerie that 22 years ago he predicted this, and there are vast warehouses that Amazon and Google and all these other cloud servers now host all of our cloud storage on. So here we are.
Yeah, I didn't really know the history of this, and actually a customer of mine pointed out that just the history behind it. Clinton was the one who did it, and I thought it was funny that I think initially they were thinking he'd be able to sign it electronically, but of course it's not legal yet. So I think he had to sign it by hand, and then he signed it electronically. I get a kick out of that.
It's like we had to sign the law physically with a pen and paper to allow us to sign it digitally. And now moving forward,
cart before the horse situation. avoided. Yep.
Reed, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast, debunking some e-sign myths with us, and explaining how to better work and sell into legal teams. We love having you on, and I'm sure this will not be the last time, my man.
It was a pleasure. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody, thanks so much for listening. Let us know what you think of the podcast. Feel free to reach out to Reed if you have more questions about debunking myths on eSignature or selling to legal teams. And we'll catch you soon with another episode of the Customer Engagement Lab.
Thanks for listening to the Customer Engagement Lab, brought to you by PandaDoc. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or connect with us on LinkedIn. We love to hear from you and what you think of the show.